We don't think it's any secret that The Force Awakens is not a very good Star Wars. To longtime fans of the franchise, it comes across as superficial, insubstantial.
You talk first, I talk first.
We'll look at several instances of broken lore in the context of the expanded universe. Let's examine the choices Disney made, and some they probably didn't realize they were making. Welcome back to our Force Awakens autopsy. In response to popular demand, here is part 2. This video had originally been planned for a year ago. However, we chose to focus on the Phantom Menace. Eventually, TFA was taken off the back burner. This is not last year's missing video. The script has been freshly crafted and is superior to the original. We have new tools, techniques, and resources. So far, there have been no real scenes in The Force Awakens. We haven't lingered in a single location for more than a few seconds. There have been no characters and no dialogue. Only one event has actually happened, launching the landing craft. Arguably, there might have been a second with the Astro Droid. Beach Ball number 8 has spotted ships in the sky. This is quite an impressive feat, since we've already discussed the lighting. It takes the droid 10 seconds to decide to run away. Technically, this does count as a thing happening. Keep this in mind, it'll come up again later. The first real scene in TFA is familiar. Location: a primitive hut on a backwater desert world. Inside, we have a generic wise old man. This fellow owns the hut, and he has a guest. A young man who fancies himself a fighter pilot and a rebel. No one can deny that these represent Ben Kenobi and Luke Skywalker. The reference is not subtle, since it wasn't intended to be. These characters were crafted to fit a familiar archetype: the cryptic old wizard and the cocky teenage fighter pilot.
You bet I could. I'm not such a bad pilot myself. We don't have to sit here.
This allows the movie to skip past the boring parts. There are other characters to introduce, so it can't waste time on these two. That wizard is just a crazy old man, and the pilot is just a pilot. In the wizard's hut, we have an unfamiliar situation. When Luke visited a hut, he was in search of knowledge. Luke wanted to learn from old Ben Kenobi, an acquaintance of his. Later, he was referred to Jedi Master Yoda, a great warrior.
Jedi Master Yoda, great warrior.
In visiting these primitive dwellings, Luke gained only one item.
I have something here for you. Your father wanted you to have this when you were old enough.
An heirloom sword and the training that comes with it. That is not the case for The Force Awakens. For a start, the wizard and the pilot do not know each other. The old man hands over a small leather pouch. This container is equivalent to a mysterious box. Whatever magical token it contains must be very important. As we will find out later, it can be redeemed for plot advancement. At this point, we should probably introduce these characters. The credits of the movie name the wizard Lor San Tekka, or at least, they include a character with that name. By drawing on external resources, I confirmed who that was. It seems that Mr. Tekka is the crazy old man. Since nobody in the movie uses his name, I shall replace it.
He's no respect for anyone.
Henceforth, he shall be known as Archmage Braytak.
That wizard's just a crazy old man.
There is some lore about this fellow, which we'll delve into next time. Braytak is only in the movie for a short time, so we'll finish that first. The other man in the room is Leia's most daring pilot. His name is Poe Dameron, which might sound familiar. The Bread Circus employs his brother, Kaka Poe Dameron, as our mascot. Poe's career choice was strongly influenced by his family. The visual dictionary avoids mentioning Kaka Poe Dameron. However, it does specify that his mother used to be a rebel fighter pilot. With his brother being a flightless parrot, Poe carried on the family tradition. Despite not being force-sensitive, Poe is implied to be a good pilot. With the plot item handed over, Braytak starts to explain.
I've traveled too far and seen too much to ignore the despair in the galaxy.
After traveling far and seeing much, he noticed a galaxy of despair. More interestingly, he continues on to mention the Jedi.
Without the Jedi, there can be no balance in the Force.
Notably, Braytak talks about balance in the Force. That phrasing has led to a lot of confusion over the years, specifically the years since 1999.
He is the chosen one. He
will bring balance.
Bringing balance to the Force was not part of the original trilogy. This is an idea taken from the prequel trilogy.
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force.
How can that be when TFA is trying to distance itself from the prequels? I see two main ways to explain this apparent contradiction. The first is that someone on the writing team intentionally added this. A reference to the prequels within the first few sentences. This should be subtle enough to slip past much of the anti-prequel crowd. For those who notice, it's a sneaky Easter egg, a bonus reference. In contrast, the second explanation is much simpler.
Is there a garbage chute? Trash compactor? Yeah, there is.
The writers were trying to invoke memories of classic Star Wars. But memories can deceive you, don't trust them.
You're just a memory.
Your memory.
These writers had accidentally included prequel ideas. The prophecy of the Chosen One had slipped into their minds. Research could have cleared up this mistake, but that was seen as unnecessary. At this point, Poe gets to deliver his first line of dialogue.
Well, because of you, now we have a chance.
Braytak has lamented the lack of Jedi in the galaxy. Poe replies that they now have a chance. Based on the opening crawl, this is due to the mystery box. Leia sent Poe to Jakku to meet Braytak. That's because the Archmage has discovered a clue to find Luke. When the fighter pilot returns with this information, Leia can respond. The clue will tell us where Luke has been imprisoned.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
Go away!
Poe can free him from his captors and take him back home. Then Skywalker can set up a Jedi Praxium to train more knights.
Here we will train you in the ways of the Force. You will learn to defend yourself with a lightsaber.
Looking forward to this, Poe makes a comment that he thinks is minor.
The General's been after this for a long time.
He says that the General was looking for the mystery box for a long time. Obviously, this is not a very precise measurement of time. It's completely subjective and depends on the context. 3 hours is a long time for Luke to be vanished, if you don't know why he's gone.
I came to this island to die.
Best guess, J.J. Abrams thinks Luke has been gone for months or years. However long it has been, it's the same time for Luke and the Jedi. The J.J. Jedi Purge happened when Luke was unable to stop it. Either that, or he was unwilling to save his students.
But this is your fight.
Personally, I don't think Luke can have been gone for any more than 5 years. We'll come back to this question several times before the movie is over. Archmage Braytak disapproves of this comment, not due to the unclear timeline, since he should understand that. Braytak has read the opening crawl, so he knows the General.
The General, count me in.
As soon as Poe describes Leia as a general, he is dismissed. This moment is why I believe these characters represent something else. Poe Dameron symbolizes the next generation, eager to step forward.
So we've taken a bit of liberty, so that actually it was always there, you just didn't notice it.
To take up the name of Star Wars, and to make it their own. The old man represents a grumpy old man who had seen the original movies.
I'm getting too old for this sort of thing.
A man grounded in a time when there was only one Star Wars trilogy. This scene isn't so much a conversation between characters as a plea to the audience. These two aren't just side characters, they are symbols of something greater. The first line of dialogue in this movie has great significance. This will begin to make things right. A channel called So Uncivilized made a bold claim. He declares that TFA opens with an anti-prequel sentiment. When the old man speaks, he doesn't get to choose his own words. They are decided for him by the subversion entity Disney. As Ben Kenobi said to Luke, "That's your uncle talking." The phrasing of our dialogue is affected by the environment. Personally, I wasn't invited to help write this movie. Still, we can make some educated guesses about the process. Let's say The Force Awakens was created in 2014. At that time, public opinion on the prequels was mixed. There have always been many subgroups of Star Wars fans. Some think that Empire Strikes Back ruined things forever.
It's not fair.
Others say Star Wars was good until Episode 6. Then you have people like me who say the entire original trilogy was good.
It's what I always wanted.
Remember, everyone working on the Disney movies has an opinion. Most likely, they enjoyed the first 2 or 3 Star Wars movies. However, these people are necessarily part of the corporate ladder. One does not get to write a Disney Wars movie out of nowhere. Several palms will need to be greased just to get your foot in the door. From there, I'll avoid speculating on the favors they trade. Let's just say knowledge of Star Wars isn't a huge factor. Around the year 2014, it was popular to be anti-prequel. A set of videos called Red Letter Media had come out around that time. For the first two prequels, the videos were 2009 and 2010. For Episode 3, apparently, there was a video in 2014. Someone at Disney had probably watched those RLM videos. Certainly, their marketing team will know anti-prequel is trendy this season.
JJ was really keen to be faithful to the originals and to have nice callbacks to them.
I believe this was a core pillar of Disney Wars. The entire reboot is based on the idea that the prequels were a mistake.
At the height of their powers, they allowed Darth Sidious to rise, create the Empire, and wipe them out.
At every turn, Disney tries to differentiate from the prequels. This will be relevant throughout the movie, and for the next one. One must remember that Disney controls both of these puppets. Braytak says that to him, the General is royalty. I believe this is meant to show him as being 30 years out of date.
Do you think a princess and a guy like me?
No.
Poe, the young buck representing the reboot, brushes that aside. His literal words seem to indicate agreement, at face value.
The General, to me, she is royalty.
Well, she certainly is that.
Combined with the mirthless laughter, I see just the opposite. Poe, and Disney speaking through him, admit that Princess Leia used to exist. They haven't stripped her title completely.
We have no time for sorrows, Commander.
But they make it very clear that General Organa is the new version. Whether you old fans like it or not, times have changed. We'll see just how true that is much later in the movie. The wizard and the pilot don't get to continue talking through the fourth wall. Suddenly, BB-8 bursts into the hut through the bead curtain. It sits there for a moment, wobbling and beeping. It warbles in a distinctly different kind of droid speak from industrial automatons. Poe responds to this with a familiar line, "We've got company." This is a recognizable phrase from Star Wars, and in English from Lucas's time and place.
Boring conversation anyway. Luke, we're gonna have company!
I won't give any credit for including this, but I won't take any points off. Now that Poe has been warned, the meeting is over. The pilot already has the item he was sent here to obtain. From this point on, there really is no reason to stick around. Both men step outside the hut to investigate the droid's warning. Poe appears to understand droid speak at least as well as the Skywalkers do. Luke and Anakin rely on display screens in their starfighters. They are grateful when a protocol droid is available to give exact translations.
What's wrong with them now?
There are several creatures approaching from the southeast.
Skywalkers can just about get by without those tools. When it comes to Poe, he seems to be perfectly fluent. If only Poe had a speaker, he could reply in binary as well. This seems to be a feature unique to Mr. Dameron. Though it wasn't stated, Braytak didn't understand the droid. All he knows is that Poe said there would be company. Archmage Braytak can read between the lines, so he doesn't prepare tea and crumpets. Poe looks through his binoculars to examine the threat. We discover 4 First-Order landing ships on the horizon. You can tell because of the conning tower, a coffin-shaped cockpit. Poe doesn't seem to have learnt anything from this, nor is he surprised. There's no need to explain that stormtroopers are coming. It seems the good guys knew this was likely to happen. That Star Destroyer hadn't been in orbit when Poe arrived. However, he knew that it could arrive at any minute. We'll have to deal with the logistics of that another day. Our brave pilot turns to the wizard and tells him to hide.
You have to hide.
It's not clear what he expects to happen. Perhaps Braytak should go inside and lock the curtain.
And hope they don't have blasters.
That isn't very reassuring.
When the stormtroopers come knocking, he can tell them he's not at home. It seems clear the First Order can search the entire village. Nothing here indicates the technology for a secret door. The only way to hide would be to flee into the desert. Slightly better than staying in the village as it's pillaged. Only slightly, though. They have a ship in orbit. Combined with the shuttles, sensor coverage will be high.
There goes another one.
Hold your fire. There's no life forms.
Realistically, you cannot run or hide from this. The Archmage Braytak has a haunted expression.
You have to leave. Go.
His reply can be translated to, "Fly, you fool." Literally, in this case, Poe is a fighter pilot. Being able to leave the planet is the only way he might survive. A Star Destroyer should be able to defeat a small one-man fighter. Even a First Order Star Destroyer has a chance in that fight.
Why aren't you blasting that puny ship?
That puny ship is too small and to too close range.
If Poe can manage to take off and reach orbit, he can jump to light speed. With a little luck, he can manage that while ties are still launching. Actually, in the reboot continuity, I don't think orbit is required. You can use a hyperdrive regardless of nearby gravity wells. Poe could escape while at 0 altitude. After hesitating for a few seconds, Poe starts running. All around him, the village is raising the alarm. The locals are milling around, some carrying weapons. At least one fellow takes cover with a rifle. Despite crude appearances, these villagers are better equipped than Tusken raiders. There are several blaster weapons present in the militia. Even so, they will be hopelessly outmatched. A single squad of stormtroopers would have a decent chance of winning this fight. Those landing ships will carry about 80 soldiers. Each ship also has a dorsal blaster turret. To have any hope, those villagers would need to be Jedi. The assault landers touch down and open their ramps. These new stormtroopers disembark while under fire. As we would expect, they immediately start neutralizing targets. This whole encounter will be over quite soon. Meanwhile, Poe is doing the sensible thing and running away. He's only about 70 meters away from the battle lines and clearly visible. That's not really an issue, since he blends in reasonably well with the locals. Besides, the stormtroopers are in combat, so they can't spare time for Poe. A moment later, though, we run into a problem. Poe is heading for an X-Wing starfighter parked nearby. This is clearly visible from inside the village, which is fine. It was conveniently placed so that Poe could make a quick getaway. Given that he's expecting the First Order to follow, that makes sense. However, absolutely no attempt has been made to conceal the starfighter. Nobody has draped a tarpaulin over the wings. There is no camo netting. The X-Wing is clearly visible from orbit, where the Star Destroyer is. Now, it's possible that they followed the X-Wing to this village.
Tatooine is sparsely populated. If the trace was correct, I will find them quickly, Master.
That would mean there's no point trying to hide the starfighter. The problem with this interpretation is how the First Order behaves. They aren't acting like they knew where the X-Wing was before launch. For a start, this seems to be the only enemy fighter on that world. As far as they can see, it's empty and powered down.
They found the remains of a rebel base, but they estimate that it has been deserted for some time.
It can be eliminated with a single bolt from a turbo laser. Let's assume the X-Wing hadn't been spotted from orbit. In that case, it would still be clearly visible from the AAL transports. Those ships definitely have sensors and 2 people with eyes. They flew from orbit towards this village and landed in the middle. Each ship has a pilot and a turret gunner whose job involves looking. In the case of the turret, that includes identifying targets.
I like this!
For example, a ship that could fly circles around the transports. Poe could have destroyed the landing craft long before any ties were scrambled. Lucky for them, he wasn't in the cockpit. They would have spotted Poe's X-Wing from the air, but let's suppose they overlooked the only legitimate threat. Since the starfighter isn't hidden, they would notice after landing. The anti-personnel turrets have a great vantage point for this. Only the infantry are firing, so the turret gunners have spare time. They should be looking for more dangerous targets than villagers. Once they spot something, like a hostile starfighter, they would call it out.
Squad leaders, we've picked up a new group of signals. Enemy fighters coming your way.
But perhaps I'm being a little unfair, and the X-Wing is well hidden. Sensors don't pick it up, and the terrain conceals it. Those stormtroopers simply weren't in a position to see anything. Let's proceed with that assumption and see where it gets us. Poe reaches his X-Wing and climbs up the ladder. I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight something. For all its shortcomings, TFA does a few things right. This ladder is my absolute favorite part of the movie. Look how elegant it is, extending out of the fuselage. That gets you across the gap, up to the ship itself. From there, the next rungs are cut into the side of the hull. It solves the problem of climbing aboard in such a perfect way. Compare the ladders from the original trilogy. These are ordinary ladders. At best, they might hook into the ship. There's no obvious place to stow them either. Disney has created a ladder superior to anything we've seen before. The next detail goes back to the normal pattern. When it comes to loading the astromech, we have a reference. A tube comes down and grabs BB-8 by the head, then the droid is hoisted up toward the starfighter. On the face of it, that seems like a perfectly adequate mechanism. It's just like how R2 was loaded back on Yavin 4. How can you possibly object to that? It's important to realize there are two differences. First of all, BB-8 has a fundamentally different construction. The head isn't attached securely, it's held on by magnets. If you were designing a BB loading system, it would attach to the body instead. Even if the magnets can hold up the body, there's no reason to grab the head. Best of all, moving the head out of the way would look interesting. Second, the astromech cranes are part of the hangar infrastructure. They hang down from near the ceiling, reaching past the ship for a droid. Astromech sockets were top loading. You can't just copy that crane into the starfighter. Well, technically you can, but it would look different. A copy of the hangar crane would extend from the top of the X-Wing. This would take up a lot of space and would look very silly. Instead, Disney copied the N1 system from the prequels. In principle, that's a fantastic choice. The scene calls for a bottom-loading astromech socket. That's already been done, and quite cleverly too. Naboo starfighters don't have an open socket on the top. Unfortunately, there is a difference in implementation. It's certainly true that the N1 crane is questionable. We don't know how those arms are stored inside the fuselage. In fact, it's hard to fit all the internals into the N1 hull. Still, it's very instructive to look at the design. On the N1, the crane has two arms instead of a single central one. They don't connect to the astromech's head dome like the original design. No, they go straight for R2's shoulders. This single choice is absolutely fantastic. These shoulders are built to take the full weight of the astromech, multiplied by local gravity, or momentum from a fall. Which, in the N1 design, is exactly what they do. The droid's entire weight is suspended from 2 points. When the crane attaches, it grabs onto those same points. Contrast this with the BB-8 crane. It attaches to the head dome, which is just like the original. That was bad enough when the head was securely attached. The other difference is how the loading process works. Look at this shot. A crane attaches to the head dome and lifts. A moment later, BB-8 pops up, with nothing attached to the head. The original movie didn't have this problem because the crane stayed attached. Once the droid was in its socket, it was safe to disconnect. As for the N1 design, we don't see the shoulders. As far as we know, the crane stays attached the whole time. Not so for the reboot continuity. Their crane absolutely has to disconnect at some point. The only option I can see is that the droid is hoisted inside. Then a different mechanism takes over. The crane retracts behind the socket and the BB is lifted. This level of complexity isn't found on any other design. To solve this problem, you have to discard the classic reference. Let's assume this X-Wing is built for BB droids in particular.
He's a BB unit, orange and white, one of a kind. I don't care what color he is!
Since they have no shoulders, it can't copy the N1 exactly. Instead, we keep the two arms but change the end connectors. This modified crane would grasp the ball using rings. Either they support the ball from below, or pinch from opposite sides. When the droid is lifted, this version can raise it all the way to the top. There's no need for a step where the crane is removed. The result is a more compact and lightweight version of the crane. It also lifts from a sturdy point and controls the loading, a legitimate improvement in technology over the years. With the astromech in its socket, we are ready to leave. Poe has fired up the ship's power. All he needs to do now is take off and he'll be safe. Unfortunately, this is where we hit a snag. We look over at the First Order landing ships. Stormtroopers are still pouring out of them. Suddenly, 2 of them look over in our direction. Blast that X-Wing over there. This establishes that the X-Wing doesn't have a cloaking device. Ever since Poe landed, it was sitting there in plain view. Any of these stormtroopers could have spotted it.
My scope's negative, I don't see anything.
Pick up your visuals, counting.
There are 84 stormtroopers and 4 pilots here. Precisely 2 of them spotted the X-Wing. I don't understand how such a thing could occur. Whatever they noticed, the other troopers should have seen. We know that FO troopers have comlinks in the helmet. These two troopers have the ability to alert everyone else. Logically, they should do so immediately. The X-Wing is the most significant threat on the planet. It has the potential to wipe out the entire assault force. Being covered in vehicle-class armor, it will not fear rifles. It would be hard to hit in the air, and infantry weapons won't do much. That's before we factor in the ray shields.
The shaft is ray shielded, so you'll have to use proton torpedoes.
These two stormtroopers are not prepared to fight an X-Wing. Naturally, they fire their rifles at it. A few shots hit the X-Wing. Poe lurches in his seat, as if he came from Star Trek.
Direct hit, sir. My shields are weakening.
A display screen seems to show damage to one of the engines. Now it's about time for another reference to the old movies. A hatch underneath the ship opens to reveal a blaster. It swivels around to target the approaching stormtroopers. This is a blatant reference to The Empire Strikes Back. In that movie, we find out that the Falcon has an anti-personnel blaster. That was a neat detail, something exciting to learn about. Han is exactly the sort who would find that to be useful. Even better, it was concealed under a panel. Not only is this cool, it's also very practical. Copying that blaster to an X-Wing is questionable. For a start, that takes up a significant amount of space. On a freighter, that's not a big sacrifice. Starfighters have an extremely limited volume for such things. On the other hand, Poe demonstrates the advantages. Anytime you're attacked by infantry, the T-65 has no firing arc. The laser cannons are in a fixed forward mount. Adding a swivel blaster brings you to around 100% weapons coverage. If you have room for it, of course you would prefer to have one. Fighting from the cockpit with a rifle would be much harder. We don't know its exact location, which does affect things. There will be multiple blind spots created by the landing gear. That same limit applies to the Millennium Falcon, of course. When Poe fires this blaster, it knocks stormtroopers flying. That's very odd because the Falcon's version didn't. That one was essentially a machine gun. The only explosions happened when hitting the E-Web and generator. When hitting stormtroopers directly, it behaved like any handheld blaster. In contrast, Poe's one is treated like a fifth laser cannon, as strong as any of the X-Wing's main weapons. That is simply wrong. It can't be explained away. An anti-personnel blaster would have killed the stormtroopers equally well. The explosive portrayal was just to look cool, nothing more. It doesn't change the outcome, but it would cause problems if taken seriously. Poe immediately leaves the cockpit. He jumps out carrying a rifle as the troopers hit the ground. With those two dead, it seems nobody is looking this way. Mighty strange, but we'll ignore that for the moment. Poe runs around to the back of his ship to inspect the damage. From what we can see, there is something wrong. A few small fires are burning, and various parts are sparking. It isn't clear what this damage means for functionality. According to the cross-sections, the only components here are S-foil actuators, the bits that make the wings move into the X position. Well, that can't be right. It would have no impact on his escape. On the original T-65 X-Wing, the hyperdrive would be somewhere at the back. Poe's ship has it mounted a bit farther forward, but still nearby. That would make sense. It explains why he doesn't take off and leave the planet. However, that would leave Poe with working repulsors and sublight engines. He could simply fly away to anywhere in the same star system. As we will later learn, the planet is absolutely riddled with spare parts. It would be trivial to either repair his fighter or trade it for a starship. Power systems are also near the back, which could work nicely. Maybe it can't generate any more power, but there were reserves to fire the blaster. Another option would be damaged repulsor lifts. Apparently those are stored in that general area of his ship. That would certainly make it harder to fly, but only the rear repulsors would be damaged, and Poe is supposed to be a good pilot. If there's anyone who could get the ship into space without repulsor lifts, that would be Poe. Damage to the sublight engines wouldn't work. There are 4 of them. So far, there are no enemy fighters nearby. Even one working ion engine would allow Poe to escape the planet. Life support is between the hyperdrive and power systems. Like with the hyperdrive, that doesn't stop him from flying away. Finally, deflector shields are somewhat nearby, which only raises more questions about all of this.
Activate ray shields!
Poe Dameron is demonstrably not a fan of ray shields. He climbed aboard, started the ship, and then never brought shields up. We would know if he had, because Anakin's N1 showed that. Deflector shields are visible in atmosphere, and we never saw them. Infantry weapons are useless when fired into ship-mounted ray shields. Battle droid rifles do nothing against the shielded N1.
Shields up!
Disney cross-sections tell us their X-Wing does have shield generators. Nothing in the movie tells us why his shields would be down. In fact, this wouldn't be revealed until Rise of Skywalker. That movie tells us that shields only work in a vacuum.
They can't activate their shields until they leave atmosphere.
Obviously, that isn't how it works in the Star Wars universe. But okay, Poe definitely was in the atmosphere, so he can't activate his shields. That brings me to my next question. Why can standard issue rifles destroy a military starship? That doesn't make sense even without ray shields. We've seen exactly what it looks like for infantry to shoot a spaceship. In A New Hope, stormtroopers arrive at Docking Bay 94. Han exchanges fire with them, using his heavy blaster pistol. Massive chunks are blown out of the concrete wall behind the troopers. When the Falcon is hit, it barely leaves a scorch mark on the hull. Something similar happens in Empire Strikes Back. Stormtroopers are firing at the Falcon using E-11s. As far as we can see, they pose no threat whatsoever. Only the E-Web was capable of punching through ship armor. Even then, it would have needed a lucky shot to cause real damage. Later in the same movie, the same blaster is used against a different ship. Chewbacca and Leia both have E-11 blaster rifles. Between them, they fire 5 shots, all of which hit Slave 1. Just like with the Falcon, they cause no discernible damage. One of these shots even hit the wing, the most vulnerable part. There's no room to install significant armor on those wings. But those are old movies and moderately sized ships. Is there something newer we could look at? Why, yes, Count Dooku's Solar Sailor. It's roughly the size of a starfighter, and it's not a military vessel. Granted, neither are the Falcon and Slave 1, but they expect to see combat. Padme fires upon the Solar Sailor, backed up by a squad of clones. She has an E5, and the clones have many DC-15A blaster rifles. We don't actually see a single shot connect. Still, Dooku doesn't look worried by all the bolts buzzing past him. It would seem reasonable to conclude that vehicle armor is effective. The best blaster rifles in the galaxy aren't a threat to starships. Only a few specific weapons would be the exception to that rule. Sniper blasters would be better, but that's mostly due to accuracy. You might be able to get better results with heavier weapons. The T-21, for example, is able to defeat light vehicle armor. However, it's never implied that this is useful against starships. Armored land speeders are the example, not necessarily starfighters. The First Order does have a Mega Blaster, reminiscent of the T-21. Like the Auto Blaster on the Falcon, these are just machine guns. Still, we expect more power from them than a standard rifle. Out of universe, this is very easy to explain. Disney wanted to establish the X-Wing early on. That's why they show the droid being loaded. However, they can't let Poe escape the planet yet. The script requires BB-8 to escape into the desert, alone. That means the X-Wing needs to be disabled. Doing that properly is a challenge, I admit. It's also the responsibility of the writers. They had one job, and this is all they could come up with.
What I felt like with JJ was he loved these films in the same way a lot of people do. They're part of your childhood. And so there's a tremendous responsibility, but he seemed completely up for that.
You can accomplish the same outcomes without undermining the setting and characters. Let's quickly run through some of the alternatives. One option is to use a gag from later in this same movie. We show Poe sprinting toward his X-Wing. The ship is sitting out in the open, fully powered off. It's clear that if Poe can reach the ship, he'll be safe. Suddenly, a volley of cannon fire comes in from off-screen. The ship is instantly destroyed, and our heroes are upset. Poe turns to BB-8 and sends him off into the desert. His own solution is to help defend the village, maybe steal a stormtrooper transport.
How do you know how to do that?
This option doesn't get you close to the X-Wing. Our heroes never reach it. On the other hand, it makes the First Order seem competent. It doesn't undermine the strength of the X-Wing either. Still, perhaps we need Poe to sit in the cockpit. Let's suppose it plays out much like in the movie. The pilot and droid get inside, preparing for takeoff. Perhaps we show that the ship isn't ready to fly yet. Maybe it will take 30 seconds to warm up the power converters. That way Poe is trying his best to escape. We could even have him raise the shields, as if he wanted to live.
Shields up!
This also presents a challenge. How do you get through those shields? The best place to start our deviation is the 2 stormtroopers. For whatever reason, these are the first to spot the X-Wing. A competent soldier would report this. The message gets relayed up the chain of command. Someone decides how best to neutralize the target. The most basic answer is massed infantry firepower. Within a few seconds, all 80 stormtroopers turn. They face the X-Wing and form into ordered ranks. Following a command we do not hear, they open fire. 80 blaster rifles are fired in full auto at a single target. This would look more spectacular than anything we've seen before. Since they only have infantry rifles, the shields hold. Poe returns fire with the swivel mount autoblaster. He wipes out a squad of 10 stormtroopers, and then another. But the troopers are disciplined, they don't even flinch. The shields buckle and blaster bolts start reaching the hull. Torn to shreds, the X-Wing is no longer a threat. Most of the squads turn away, back to the village. Another answer would be delegation. After the X-Wing is reported, the stormtroopers all glance at it. Every one of them has seen, and they just don't care. The troopers are supremely confident that their leaders have this under control, perhaps with the turret gunners on the AAL transports. Anywhere from 1 to 4 of these target the X-Wing. The result is much like the massed infantry firepower. Those turrets are specifically anti-personnel weapons, much like the ventral autoblaster on Poe's X-Wing. That means the good guy can't retaliate effectively. It also allows his ship to survive for several seconds, long enough to realize he won't win and to abandon ship. One option I particularly like is the orbital strike. After all, there is a Star Destroyer waiting in orbit. Just think of all those cannons sitting there being wasted. As another type of delegation, the stormtroopers ignore Poe. Then we see a single turbo laser bolt streaking down from orbit. It hits the back of the X-Wing, blasting a huge crater out of it. Against capital ship weapons, the deflectors are useless. The sheer power overwhelms them in a fraction of a second. Now the shield generators are scattered across the desert.
Target, maximum firepower.
This option has the advantage of being obvious. There is no chance to defend against even one turbo laser. Even better, the ship clearly cannot be repaired. However, it strains credulity to survive a direct hit from a turbo laser. We've seen X-Wings explode after taking far less firepower. A better option would be to fire a different orbital weapon. Officially, the Disney Star Destroyer includes ion cannons. Those have a notable feature in the Star Wars universe. Deflector shields can be tuned to work against ion cannons. This is a trade-off which nobody ever takes advantage of. That's because doing so makes your shields useless against blasters. You are always vulnerable to one weapon or the other. Poe's ship can be hit by an ion cannon from orbit. His X-Wing is now disabled, and he'll have to abandon it. This ion cannon option is one of my favorites. Only one of the top solutions, though. I have saved the best of them for last. Technically, this is another case of delegating. Instead of vehicle-mounted weapons, we call in one guy. I think it would be neat if we gave the stormtroopers specialist weapons. Throughout the movie, we will see several of these. In this very scene, we have a guy using a flame projector. Or at least, in Star Wars it would be a flame projector. Disney just calls it a flamethrower instead. We also have confirmation that every squad gets a specialist. In this operation, that would mean 8 heavy weapons on the field. These include the T-21 replacement, shield guy, and flamethrowers. Let's assume for a moment that there are 2 of each. The visual dictionary says all types were present. I think there's still room for a slightly more niche weapon specialist. Perhaps one guy could have a flechette launcher. Some kind of handheld ion weapon wouldn't be crazy either. For anti-vehicle weapons, though, I can see 2 options. Either a missile launcher or a grenade launcher. Explosive weapons that can pass right through ray shields. These are the specialists who destroy the X-Wing. Having a dedicated anti-vehicle weapon makes it far more plausible. A physical weapon also sidesteps the question of deflector shields. Regardless of how it happened, the X-Wing is out of action. Poe climbs out and watches how the village is doing. Not very well. Shockingly, the soldiers are winning. 2 of them are menacing a screaming goat man. This is the Abednado species, a Disney invention. All things considered, they look fairly decent. I'm sure one will eventually be added to the Mos Eisley Cantina. When that happens, it won't look completely out of place.
Hey, what are you guys doing here?
Despite the quality design, I can't stand seeing them. This species demonstrates that Disney can create new aliens. And yet, this is the only race I ever see from them. I would very much like to never see one again. They can start using these again after demonstrating that they don't need them.
We don't serve their kind here.
What?
The name Abednego is one I refuse to say for a third time. However, I will say that these things are treated like people. Not something to gawk at, just this guy, you know? The battle, if you can call it that, rages on. It's not clear what the First Order's objectives might be. We see flame troopers setting fire to anything they like. That means they can't be looking for any material object.
Commander, tear this ship apart until you found those plans, and bring me the passengers. I want them alive!
Archmage Braytak is just walking around, so it can't be people. Villagers are getting shot, and those rifles aren't set to stun. Also, flamethrowers don't have a stun setting in the first place. They certainly can't be here to find Braytak. He's standing out in the open, 5 meters from a trooper. Yet they can't be here for destruction either. If they wanted this village burnt to the ground, there are better ways. That Star Destroyer supposedly has 3,000 mega-turbo lasers. A single volley should reduce this area to glass and slag. Poe Dameron can't get away with being that careless. He does have a physical object to retrieve from this village. That would be easy if he still had a functional X-Wing. Since he won't be able to escape, Poe needs a new plan. Trying something radical, he actually opens his mystery box.
It's just been something we've been kind of struggling with, the whole idea of where it leads, just because it's such a story point.
If the right idea showed up, it would actually help the story.
Inside the leather pouch is a scale model of a skyscraper. There is a blue glowy bit on the base. That either means it's radioactive or electronic. Eventually, we will find out that it's for data storage, the equivalent of a USB flash drive. That's important because of what Poe does with it. Now, Mr. Dameron is hardly a princess. That doesn't stop him from directly copying Leia's solution. When surrounded by enemies, he turns to the astromech droid, inserts a storage device in the front, and gives it a mission. This reference to the OT is particularly shameless. Perhaps we are meant to see the recycled plot as a good thing. It's also possible this is intended to be an in-universe choice. Leia is Poe's boss, and he might know about her past. One could make the argument that Poe is copying a winning strategy. I don't believe it's in-universe for a moment, but it's not impossible. To be fair, the droid is Poe's only remaining asset. After inserting the data tapes, he tells it to run. Getting away from the stormtroopers is usually smart. It's not quite clear what Poe thinks will happen. He says he'll come back and find BB-8 later.
I'll come back for you! It'll be alright!
Perhaps he intends to defeat all 88 stormtroopers on the planet.
Face down the whole First Order? What did you think was going to happen here?
And then the Star Destroyer in orbit, of course. That seems completely implausible, no matter his overconfidence.
Shit, what the...
Stealing an AAL transport is relatively sane. His only other choice would be escaping into the desert, possibly to lead the First Order in the wrong direction. Whatever his plan is, Poe takes cover with his rifle. He does the sci-fi equivalent of making the gun go clunk.
I'm sorry, sir. It's time for you to leave.
That is to say, waving it around a bit until it makes a noise. This isn't functional, it's completely optional. It just gives you a bonus to hit during your next combat round. One interesting detail is that Poe is using his scope. Most of the time, aiming in Star Wars is overkill. You'll have good enough accuracy without actually using the sights. Several characters can get help from their helmets as well. In the case of Poe, he's firing at somewhat longer ranges than usual. He fires 3 shots with perfect accuracy. That makes 3 troopers down, only 85 to go. This final trooper is given extra significance to the plot. After being shot, he keels over behind a low wall. Being an experienced gamer, I am not surprised by this. Chest-high walls are guaranteed to exist anywhere combat is happening. Another stormtrooper notices this spiffing idea. He quickly kneels behind the same bit of cover. This new guy is clearly not very experienced. He looks around frantically for the button prompt to revive. Alas, the only one available is pressing F to pay respects. The dying trooper raises a hand to the other guy's helmet. Halfway through that action, he dies. This leaves a set of 3 stains on the other guy's helmet. It makes for a neat visual, like a set of claw marks. Reminds me of that guy from Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's probably what the inspiration was. It clearly marks a main character. I just have one question. Where did the blood come from? The tempting answer is from inside the dying trooper. This fits with common knowledge. We are leather bags of impure water. Unfortunately, I am an expert on biology and bagology. It is my experience that bags will leak when punctured. That is the usual way to get blood from the inside to the outside. For J.J. Abrams and friends, that might be enough. This man has been shot, therefore he is punctured and leaking. Those of us paying attention may not be satisfied. Looking carefully at the movie, the trooper was shot in the neck. The blaster bolt impacts just below the helmet. I don't see any damage to the armor in that location. The only compromised part of the armor is the glove. How peculiar. He wasn't shot in the hand. You might think he put his hand to the wound, getting blood on it. No, the trooper immediately falls over. He goes limp and doesn't move until wiping the helmet. You could argue that his glove was destroyed while fighting villagers. Maybe that blood isn't his own, or even human blood. When the blaster hits him, we get a decent look at his right hand. The glove appears to be completely intact. I can only conclude this is a continuity error, which would be fine if this was just a minor scene. But it isn't. This moment is pivotal for a main character. The blood smear is when the generic stormtrooper becomes Finn. I'm going to assume JJ loved the visual of the bloody helmet, that someone had it in mind from early in the storyboard stages. When the scene is that important, why not get it right? Perhaps Disney was running out of money and couldn't afford another take.
I mean, the whole thing was crazy. It's like,
Come on!
yeah!
Or maybe nobody was paying attention to the details. Speaking of attention to detail, there's one more thing. Poe is definitely firing a blaster rifle. We've seen those used in the past, and they don't behave like this. When a blaster bolt hits someone, it usually causes burn damage. There may be a small flame after the impact. What we do not see is a pool of blood under each body. Star Wars is usually a rather bloodless setting. A notable exception would be the very first saber amputation. After that point, lightsabers will cauterize the wound. The flesh is seared on both sides of the cut. Blasters behave in a similar way. Wounds do not bleed. But the script calls for blood, so there will be blood. There would be many ways to get access to blood if you needed some, if you were concerned about doing things the right way. However the blood got there, it causes a problem. This stormtrooper starts having flashbacks to a past life. He remembers having once visited France. That would be traumatic enough, but they'd been filming a war movie there. The only recognizable stormtrooper stumbles around for a while. To his credit, he has managed to avoid dropping his blaster rifle. That would have instantly made him stand out upon returning. Losing your equipment is typically frowned upon.
Submit your blaster for inspection.
Yes, Captain.
The nameless trooper eventually makes his way into cover. At this point, he hears some unfamiliar music. Poe and the trooper look up to see a shuttle arrive. This will take quite some time to unravel. Don't worry, we shall deal with it and its occupants soon enough.
You're so right.
And now, let's go into some more detail about a couple of aspects. The pilot strides boldly out of the hut and holds up a set of electro-binoculars. Sorry, I meant Neurosav TE 4.4 field quadnoculars. The prop looks passable, and so does the view through them, until you inspect the overlay used. The black mask is similar to Luke's binoculars, and it has a rangefinder display, except that Disney doesn't know what the numbers could possibly mean, so they mean nothing. In the top right of the Disnoculars, there is a number. This is always 3 digits, ranging from 480 to 946. If anything was going to be a rangefinder, this would be it. We would expect the numbers to change as Poe looks at different things, yet they would only move within certain limits. However, the numbers don't correlate with the focus. When you aren't paying attention, they look fancy and impressive. Upon closer inspection, the numbers are random, meaningless. Someone made a decision about what numbers should be shown here. I see 2 options. They used to have a meaning, or they didn't. Both options are equally terrifying. The end result was chosen for visual appeal. But in one scenario, someone put some thought into it. Then he was overruled. There is a similar number in Luke's set of electro-binoculars. In the bottom right corner, it has a 4-digit number. It ranges from 0017 plus to -9. This doesn't have any clear correlation, but it does have a pattern. The number will sometimes jump between two extremes. Within each range, though, it only moves by a few tens. The number also ticks down slowly towards 0. Perhaps this number is a rolling average of relative ranges. I can't give you a definitive answer on what the number means. If nothing else, Luke's number behaves like it has some real purpose. I can't say the same for the Disney equivalent. Let's take a quick break from numbers and look at some letters. All the other symbols are in the bottom center of Poe's view. On the right end, there are 3 symbols. These are small, dim, and indistinct. I can't really make out the middle one, but I can guess. Translating the Aurebesh, that's his CIL. On the opposite side, the letters are easier to read. They start out with Yurt Herf Isk semicolon. It would appear that these are nonsense, random Star Wars symbols. For the most part, that would be correct. The bottom left display shows 8 different strings. Only 2 have any meaning: lock and scan. Then it goes back to displaying random nonsense. At one point, the binoculars show FNV. It's possible New Vegas was popular in the special effects minds. Now we come to the part that's really shocking. To get a baseline for comparison, we should look at Luke's binoculars. In the bottom center, there is a row of numbers. This is a flat horizontal scale. It slides sideways through unchanging numbers. The lowest number we see is 425, the highest is 525. The indicator doesn't rest exactly on each number, meaning the digital dial is still precise. It doesn't behave exactly like a rangefinder, which is understandable. The scale moves in the same pattern for 2 different locations. We should interpret this as a constraint of the first movie's budget. Those banthas are closer than the horizon at the farm. Still, this green scale is prominent and clear to read. It's exactly where you'd put the rangefinder output. With that in mind, let's compare it to the Disney version. Whatever we discover, budget cannot be an excuse. Looking in the same place, we find something similar, a set of numbers sliding horizontally while we watch. Actually, there are 2 sets that slide independently. It isn't clear what these numbers are supposed to indicate. More importantly, there is no way for these numbers to be useful. While they slide, the numbers also change randomly. There is no pattern behind this, the numbers just get replaced. You could argue the numbers are sliding so fast it looks like they're standing still. That would be consistent with the visuals, but it still makes no sense. In universe, Poe would never get anything from reading those. By the time you can process a numeral, it has already changed. The same goes for the status indicator with Aurebesh letters. After a fraction of a second, the display changes again. We cannot explain these binoculars in universe. The only alternative is to look behind the scenes, and that makes things worse. Someone had to decide which Aurebesh letters would appear. That process led to 3/4 of the Aurebesh being nonsense. Someone had to decide where the numbers go and how they behave. A real person put this together, making the numbers slide. When the effects were finished, someone signed off on these randomly changing numbers. As I alluded to earlier, 2 types of people are responsible for this. One group is made of artists, and the other would be the managers. We can't know exactly where to place blame for this outcome. Either category might value visual appeal over making sense. Ultimately, Disney leadership is culpable for everything. At some point in the hierarchy, someone approved the final version. However, we don't know who decided to use random numbers. It probably wasn't J.J. Abrams or Kathleen Kennedy. That's why I prefer not to blame any one person for the reboot. We'll probably never know the full story behind the binoculars. Speaking of which, I shouldn't call them binoculars. For those who aren't familiar, binoculars are kind of like telescopes. What sets them apart is that binoculars come in pairs, like your eyes. In the Star Wars universe, these become macro binoculars. Basically just binoculars powerful enough to show a space battle. These can be enhanced by adding various electronic features. The resulting electro binoculars are the ultimate for far-seeing. Your only upgrade path is to buy more expensive electro binoculars. That is not the case for the Disney reboot. Binoculars don't seem to appear anymore. Poe has a set of folding or telescopic quadnoculars. When he raises them to his eyes, 2 lenses snap into place. This doesn't seem to save any significant amount of space, nor does it look like this would protect the optics. The entire design of the quadnoculars is a bit confusing. With Poe's set, it appears to be 2 pairs of binoculars, one set mounted on top of the other for no real benefit. They don't seem to be linked to allow for more light to enter. Quadnoculars aren't a logical improvement over binoculars. 4 is a bigger number than 2, but that's all there is to it. We can't even say that quads are part of an arms race. There's no scenario presented that would require quadnoculars. Perhaps some kind of jamming system that can be defeated with parallax. They don't combine multiple points of view to produce a 3D image. Quadnoculars also don't fit into the timeline anywhere. It would be one thing if these were the sequel trilogy version. For some reason, the Galaxy switched to a different technology after Endor. That would be strange, but somewhat interesting. Instead, Disney added quadnoculars to Rogue One, a movie set long before The Force Awakens. That means the reboot universe has always had quadnoculars. You can't define the era by what kind of binoculars are used. As for why quadnoculars, I think I have the answer. Something vaguely similar has cropped up in recent decades. Night vision goggles have become ubiquitous in games and real life. One of the downsides to this technology is tunnel vision. This has led to the development of GPNVGs, or quadnods. The 4 tubes are 2 parallel facing forward and 2 panoramic ones. By adding an extra tube to each eye, they restore your peripheral vision. That's a pretty neat concept, and they look distinctive. Unfortunately, it seems Disney didn't understand the purpose. They just noticed that modern soldiers have 4 eyes. Obviously, as a modern movie, TFA should follow that standard. 4 eyes are better than 2, and anything less wouldn't look realistic. Therefore, all binoculars must be replaced with quadnoculars. It's time to discuss the pilot and his space aeroplane. The choice of plane tells you a lot about a pilot, ideally. For example, if your ace pilot insists on flying a Tiger Moth, that can be good or bad. In 1936, that is a minor quirk, a personal preference. In 1966, that is a biplane, and everyone else is flying jet fighters. Technology improves over time in either galaxy. That fact was clearly visible in the first Star Wars movie.
Look at this. Ever since the XP-38 came out, they just aren't in demand.
Over the course of the original trilogy, it became more obvious. During the original Trench Run, there were 4 starfighter models. The standard Imperial fighter was the TIE LN. Lord Vader has a unique fighter, the TIE Advanced X-1. Technically not even a TIE, due to its quad-ion engines. This is commonly called a prototype, since they didn't see full production. I'd argue limited production experimental type is more accurate. Either way, this shows development of new starfighters during the OT. The first movie also shows a combination of Y-Wings and X-Wings. We would later discover that the Y-Wings had been the standard Alliance fighter. Over time, they were replaced with the cutting-edge X-Wing model. This is exactly what we'd expect to see in the setting. Technological development continues through the trilogy. By Episode 5, the Star Destroyer fleet has been upgraded. The Imperial 1 has been replaced with the Imperial 2, both of which are improvements over the Victory class from the Clone Wars. Episode 6 gives us new starfighters on both sides. The Empire has developed the Advanced X-1 into the TIE Interceptor. For the Rebel Alliance, now there are 2 of them. General Dodonna and Walex Blissex created the A-Wing. This was now the fastest starfighter in the galaxy. Meanwhile, Commander Akbar designed the B-Wing. Since all this happened over just a few years, the old models were still used. Standard TIE LN and Y-Wing squadrons remained common. That scenario doesn't apply to the Disney movies. These are set 30 years later, not 3 years. Imagine showing up to the war in a fighter 30 years out of date. That would be slightly better than trying a trench run on foot. Maybe if your opponent also happens to use obsolete tech. Generally, that restricts you to fighting pirates. Small-scale local threats, not real militaries. The reboot universe acknowledges this, at least most of the time. All their starfighters are said to be upgrades over their ancestors. In the case of TIE fighters, their word is all we have. The variants in the movies appear to be ancient. We saw how TIEs were improved over the original trilogy. Modifications include obvious reshaping of the solar wings. All that research has been scrapped in order to bring back the original shape. Luckily, things are not so bad with the rebooted X-Wing. The new version is designated T-70 instead of T-65. This is a good detail. It implies some history. I'd even go so far as to say it qualifies as legitimate world building. Something similar happened in the Star Wars universe. As we've established, the original X-Wing won't last forever. Over its service life, upgraded models were introduced. One of the earliest was from T-65B to the T-65C A2. Later versions included the T-65A3 and the T-65AC4. Around the time of the Disney movies, we should see the T-65XJ3. But that isn't the only option for a modern starfighter. The main competition to the X-Wing series was the E-Wing, created by a company named Frytech Incorporated. The E-Wing would have heavier laser cannons and larger torpedo magazines, a reinforced hull, and a sturdy fixed-wing design. As fast and agile as a TIE interceptor, more durable than an X-Wing, and twice as quick to repair. Ultimately, the E-Wing did not replace the X-Wing. As with any new machine, it had some teething problems. By the time it was fully reliable, the X-Wing had caught up. There was no longer a clear advantage to the E-Wing. However, Poe is the right age to have grown up around E-Wings. Perhaps his parents favored the E-Wing, or they were used as training craft. Your preference doesn't really matter anymore. Either starfighter can be upgraded to be relevant in battle. The advantage is out of universe, subverting expectations. Imagine if our new pilot character did the unexpected. We could be introduced to him during a friendly argument. His fellow pilots all favor the T-70, but Poe likes the E-Wing. It would even work as a running gag throughout the trilogy.
You came in that thing? You're braver than I thought.
What a piece of junk!
Turn up that ship!
Now that's garbage! The garbage will do!
At some point, Poe would grumble about having to fly an X-Wing. This would also be an excuse to give Poe a better astrodroid. The New Republic ordered a new astromech to go with the new starfighter. Industrial Automaton created the R7, which looks visually distinctive. The torso has a different set of panels. The radar eye is a different shape. Poe would have had this R7 for decades. They are no longer new, possibly inherited from a parent who flew the E-Wing. That would allow for modifications, like a vocabulator. Yes, that's right. The replacement for R2 could speak in BASIC.
We are very fucking stupid to hold the word at this colossally high standard. Every other slur that can be used in a comedic sense or
possibly even a deep, sinister voice and matching personality. If you must have BB-8, have the droid actually belong to Rey. Personally, I think Poe the E-Wing pilot would have been much better. It would present a universe that had changed significantly from the OT. Much like the prequels had been different, notice the lack of TIEs and X-Wings. Disney was not willing to accept that. A galaxy without stormtroopers, TIE fighters, and X-Wings. These are important brand elements, so they must be included. Likewise, the good guys cannot be in power. There must be an evil empire. That's the real reason behind the T-70 redesign. The point is to have a slightly different model which looks familiar. It was never meant to be a T-65 XJ3 upgrade. The same pattern holds true for every aspect of the reboot. At this point, we should go over the replacement X-Wing itself. In terms of overall shape, this is much like the T-65. It does line up with what we expect from technology, a gradual refinement of what works. The changed look isn't even that bad. Not as good as the original, but I don't find it offensive to look at. My only gripe is the reasoning I sense behind the change. The T-70 has its engines moved out along the wing, and they are semicircular. With the S-foils closed, there are two large circular structures on the wings. The irksome part is that this is another World War II reference. Its layout is reminiscent of the Mosquito and other twin-engine planes of the time. The designers at Incom could have come up with this shape on their own, but I sense JJ's meddling. Or anybody else involved with the movie, but someone approved this decision. The problem is that there's no reason for those 4 ion engines to look like 2 propeller engines. The T-70 has a much better reference added to it. In the EU, a company called Frytech Incorporated built the E-Wing. Frytech was made up of designers who left Incom, so the E-Wing was a true descendant of the X-Wing. Disney's T-70 is made by Incom Frytech with a hyphen. This proves someone is aware of the E-Wing and was unable or unwilling to put them on screen. Another strange detail about this ship is the name. Well, not precisely this ship, the one destroyed in its first scene. Poe has access to a unique X-Wing with a custom paint job. However, for this mission, he chose not to use it. The damaged T-70 uses the standard blue and white color scheme. During a later event, you can fairly easily spot Poe's starfighter. He flies the black one, and it is named Black One. Very odd indeed. That doesn't fit the pattern. Famously, Luke Skywalker flies as Red 5 at Yavin.
Red 3 standing by. Red 6 standing by.
Red 9 standing by.
Red 5 standing by.
Red Squadron and Gold Squadron have several numbered pilots. On Hoth, we encounter Rogue 2 of Rogue Squadron.
Echo Base, this is Rogue 2.
The pattern you may have extrapolated has an exception. There is no Red 1, no Gold 1, and definitely no Rogue 1.
Red leader standing by.
Gray leader standing by. Green leader standing by.
Instead, Red Squadron is led by Red Leader, Gold by Gold Leader. For this to be a Star Wars call sign, it would use that format. Poe would have to command Black Squadron as Black Leader.
As a matter of fact, sir, that's exactly what did happen.
Shockingly, it seems JJ and friends got this one correct. Poe will go on to be addressed as Black Leader.
Give Poe full authorization for attack.
Black leader, go to sublights on your phone.
Roger, base.
Perhaps for this early mission, he took one of the spare X-Wings. Maybe you aren't permitted to fly the black one without the entire squadron. This black paint is not a squadron marking, like at Yavin, nor is it a personal deviation from the standard, like Anakin's yellow paint. Rather, this is sensor-scattering ferrosphere paint. Presumably, that works by having iron balls all through the paint. It's important to note that below the surface, it's a standard T-70. We are not dealing with a stealth variant of the X-Wing. You won't be sneaking through any blockades in this thing. The stealth will be minimal, just enough to make detection harder. Slightly slower target locks, getting closer before your ship is detected. Painting the hull also does nothing to mask your emissions. Are your weapons charged and your shields up? Then you aren't even remotely stealthy. Having your sublight engines running will completely give away your position.
I'm gonna shut down everything but the emergency power systems.
Does that include shutting me down too?
The only worse choice would be to broadcast any communication signals. At the end of the day, I do have to give credit to this ship design. I'm not fond of it, and I find some parts to be irksome. The story would have been more interesting if they didn't use X-Wings. Still, the overall concept and execution are solid. Several features, like the ladder, are legitimately good ideas. If that was the standard of quality from Disney, we'd be much better off. The T-70 is a ship that could plausibly exist within Star Wars. In isolation, this would have been absolutely acceptable. When we notice the old design of TIE Fighter, that's the real problem. It becomes clear that the X-Wing wasn't picked for in-universe reasons. Thank you for watching to the end. Our primary focus will continue to be the prequels. When we finish with those, we'll move on to the original trilogy. Along the way, we intend to reserve the occasional slot. This way, we can still produce regular one-off videos. We're not making any promises for the ETA of Part 3, except for when it's done. There are two ways to support us. Become a patron at patreon.com/thebreadcircus, or subscribe, like, and comment. Only the former option guarantees that your name lives on in history. The other is embarrassing YouTube-y stuff.
What, you think you're some kind of Jedi waving your hand around like that? I'm a Toydarian. My tricks don't work on me. Only money. No money, no parts, no deal.